So here we are back in Dreamweaver, and again I'm using Dreamweaver as the code editor for PHP simply because, if you recall, killerphp.com was originally created to communicate with web designers. My whole goal was to make PHP and programming in general approachable to designer types as opposed to nerd coder types. And since most web designers use Dreamweaver, I decided to use Dreamweaver as the program to write PHP code. I mention all this because there are dedicated PHP editors that are very capable and do have more capabilities with regards to PHP than Dreamweaver, because of course Dreamweaver, its specialty is not PHP writing, its specialty is actually general web design. That being said, Dreamweaver is very usable for PHP code, and so here I use it. Anyhow, so we have a simple page here, nothing special. I just put this in for my own notes for the video. The key here is the PHP code block here. This is all the code that you need to connect to a MySql database. Actually, there's a little bit more than what you need, and I'll get into that as we go along. So the first thing you want to look at is this first function called MySql connect. And this function has three arguments: the location of the database, and since we're working on our own computers, that's called the local host. And I discussed this, I believe, in one of my first PHP videos where I discussed the concept of local host briefly. But just in case, localhost is a generic term, a catch-all term meaning your own computer. And this could be your home computer, or it could be the local host, your server could use that as well. So if you're writing a PHP script that contacts a database on the same computer where that script happens to be sitting, and that's probably the case, then if you use MySql Connect, you could probably put in localhost. And I can tell you, for 99.9% of you, when you're using MySql on your public hosting company's servers, you're probably going to use the address of localhost. Otherwise, you could specify a URL on some other domain name if that database is set up to allow remote access, and that's a whole different issue. Anyhow, so this first argument in this function is the address of the database and the database server, and the second argument here is the username. And of course, if you recall, we checked out the user, and for this database, root was the user that we had set up for it. And the final argument, of course, is password. And since we did not set up a password for this user root, I'm just leaving it blank. Again, you always want to use a password on publicly accessible databases. That'd be crazy not to, because then people could go in there and destroy all your data and so on. So, but since rather this is just a video tutorial on training, and because this particular database is only existing on my local computer, it's not publicly accessible, I just leave it blank for the sake of making things easier for us. So I have my function. MySql Connect is one of the built-in functions in PHP, and it takes care of all the things it needs to do in the background to actually connect to the database. And I assign this to the variable I call my_connection. Of course, you can call this anything you want. You assign a variable to the connection to create a handle on the connection, just like any other variable. So MySql Connect, the function, returns that handle to the database. Think of a handle as a control point, as a handle on a frying pan, if you will. Think of it in that sense. And the reason you have this handle is so that you can use this later on. If you scroll down here, I have my connection here, and I use it in another function called MySql close. So once you've done all your database stuff, you always want to close the connection. And the reason you want to close connection is sort of like shutting off the taps after you've filled up your sink with water. You don't want to keep the water running, so it's always a good idea to close off the connections. And this is an explicit way to tell PHP, okay, we're done with the MySql connection, please close it. Although, for many people, once this PHP script is run, all the connections are closed automatically anyway, so may not be too important. But that being said, there are times when MySql close could be very useful in terms of freeing up memory and so on. Anyway, just understand, we create our connection using the MySql connect function. We have our 3 arguments: URL, meaning location, username, password. We create a variable so we have a handle on the connection so that we can use that later on to do things like close the connections.